at the Southern Seminary website from Matthew Hall. He is our peace, the centrality of the gospel of Christ in racial reconciliation. There's not a lot in it that positively I would have issues with. I do have a strong issue with capitulating on the language of quote-unquote racial reconciliation. I do not believe that races are reconciled. Mankind is reconciled to God. Believers are reconciled to one another because of their reconciled state to God and because of the fact that each one of them stands on the same ground as every other one before God. So in other words, since my forgiveness before God is dependent upon the imputed righteousness of Jesus Christ without any works that I can add to that, and that anyone who will stand before God on that same basis, then all of the races, ethnicities is a much better term, all the ethnicities in the body have been reconciled when they recognize that their identity is now determined by Christ, not by their great-grandfather. So, theologically, it seems to me that to give in to this language is to sacrifice a key definitional truth of the gospel. Or even if you say, no, you're right about that part, but there is a cultural milieu, a cultural context in which we can talk about racial reconciliation within a particular culture. I wish people would emphasize very strongly, because we as Americans are unfortunately exporting poisonous American-based divisions into churches in the United Kingdom, Europe, South Africa, Australia, all over the world. And we're creating divisions that are based upon reading relationships based upon the American experience of slavery, and then continued racial divides based upon what the Democrats did in the South, basically. Jim Crow laws, those types of things. So when we export that to places that don't have that background, the result is horrific. And I've seen it. I've been talking with people about it. I travel. I see it. It's a horrible thing. Anyway, so people will say, well, we're only talking about racial reconciliation. Well, the problem is you're using biblical language. And what we're seeing in the social justice movement is biblical language always ends up becoming secondary to the cultural layer placed upon top of it, placed over it. That cultural layer becomes the lens through which the rest is read. And unfortunately, in the modern context, what that means is a fundamental degradation of the biblical categories. So I would strongly disagree that there is in the Christian faith a need for racial reconciliation, because I'm talking biblically. But notice some of these statements. For example, he says, as a historian theologian, I am interested in the ways sin takes form within specific cultures and historical contexts. It does so in complex ways. Not only does sin bring about guilt or culpability on individual sinners, but it also brings corruption on whole societies or cultures. For example, I believe that future Christian generations will be horrified at the evil of legalized abortion in our time, and will rightly give attention to the multidimensional realities of that demonic sin in its individual and structural forms. There is an individual guilt that those who participate in the abortion industry bear before a righteous God, but our American culture has been deeply affected and corrupted by the culture of death in ways we may not always notice. I agree. The fact that this is a culture that is closing its eyes to the murder of unborn children God is perfectly just to bring judgment upon the entire culture. He's done that, and we warn people. That's what he's going to do. That's what he's going to do. And so, just in passing, it did strike me, I believe that future Christian generations will be horrified. Is there a hat tip toward a little post-millennialism there? Maybe? I don't know. I don't know. Goes on. In recent months, the topics of critical race theory and intersectionality have prompted no small measure of discussion in Baptist life. Well, not just Baptist life. It would be virtually impossible to get into a complete review of CRT here, but let's be very clear. Okay, here's Matthew Hall. Many people see him as being second in line. Well, first in line after Dr. Mohler. It's going to be very clear about CRT. Good. Christian witness must reject CRT and the ideological foundations that shape it, along with the proposals it offers for change. In the big picture, it seems to me that CRT assumes a basic materialism, ignoring spiritual realities, and in particular, the truth that human beings are made in the image of God. Anybody disagree with that? Have I not said that over and over and over again over the past number of, now we're getting into the years, aren't we? At least months. It also seems to me to have a deficient teleology, one that sees history most basically as a contest between oppressors and the oppressed. That's for sure. Because of its deficiencies, CRT can never adequately diagnose the fundamental problems inherent in racism, nor can it adequately prescribe a true solution. Only the gospel of Christ can do that. Similarly, this is why liberation theologies are irreconcilable with the biblical gospel. While the biblical worldview certainly acknowledges injustice in a fallen world, the defining story of Scripture is redemptive, centered in the person and work of Christ, propelling history forward to the glory of God. Now, I stop and say, and CRT and all of its children are always forcing us to look backwards. We can never look forward. We are constantly living in light of the sins of the past. There's no forgiveness. That would be a good thing to have added in there. This story is inseparable from the miracle of the new birth and the necessity of personal saving faith in Jesus as Lord and Savior. The church is to be the community where the reconciling power of the gospel is displayed in the world. So, great. I'm glad to hear that. But from whence cometh my confusion? Well, my confusion comes from the same source as a lot of other folks. And I'm going to be pulling up a video here, Rich, so you'll want to wake up now. I'm picking on Rich. You know, I wouldn't pick on Rich if he was wearing a Coogee. But monocolor sweaters, it's just screaming out. Pick on me. Not only that, he should know I'm a Trekkie. What color is his sweater? Rich? What color?
Go ahead. Make my day.
You don't seem to understand.
Oh,
no. When you're wearing a red shirt,
fine.
look, it's never Kirk that kills him. The aliens are going to get you. And it's going to be a really lousy death. I assure you. I mean, some of them look really painful. It's bad, yeah.
Yeah. You do realize that that's fiction, right?
I don't know. I've got a board cube right there. I've got a warp core going in the back.
Yeah.
There, I've got tribbles.
Yeah.
I've got tribbles. See?
Yeah. Okay. All right.
This poor tribble needs a new battery. They didn't realize in that initial one that all they had to do was just let the batteries run out and everything would be fine. Anyway, okay.
Does cause one to take stock in his employment futures. Living in a world of fiction. All right. No.
So
back to serious things.
You got this ready to go?
I do.
Okay. So here is my honest source of confusion. I read the words of the article posted today, and the necessary result and application would be this. But then there's video like this.
I am a racist. Okay, so if that freaks you out, if you think the worst thing somebody can call you is a racist, then you're not thinking biblically. Because guess what? Like, I'm going to struggle with racism and white supremacy until the day I die and get my glorified body in a completely renewed and sanctified mind.
Wow.
Because I'm immersed in a culture where I benefit from racism all the time.
You say justice, you talk about racial justice, and white folks get very nervous.
People are far less ashamed to say whatever is running through their mind, white folks. There has been a normalization and an empowering, a legitimization, I would say, of almost explicitly racist rhetoric in the church. And things that even 2, 3, 4 years ago, folks would have said, I'm thinking this, but I don't think I'm supposed to say it. Now they're like, I'm just going to say it. Everything that you assumed or thought was normal in the world, or everything that you thought was true about your tradition, your denomination, your own family, there's a whole, I'm going to pull the veil back, and what looked like this beautiful narrative of faithfulness and orthodoxy and truth and righteousness and justice, I'm going to peel that back, and I'm going to show you the rotting corpse of white supremacy that's underneath that surface.
Okay. Oh man, I wanted to keep it right there. There it is. The rotting corpse of white supremacy that's underneath that surface. Okay, so how do you put these together? Jon Harris on Twitter posted a series of 10 questions. No, Siri, I'm not talking to you.
Sorry, I missed that. Could
Yes.
you say it again, please?
No. Very strange creature. So here's some questions for Matt Hall from Jon Harris, and I have the exact same questions. Do you still consider yourself to be a racist? Do you believe...
I'm not sure I understand.
Turn it off. You're supposed to be upside down. You're not supposed to work when it's upside down. Number one, do you still consider yourself to be a racist? Number two, do you believe there is structural racism in the United States? And if so, where? 3, if you believe there is, who is guilty of structural oppression? 4, do you believe multi-ethnicity should be a pursuit of the church? 5, if so, why? 6, do you believe race ought to be taken into consideration when hiring church workers? 7, do you reject Resolution 9? Let me stop for a moment and point out. The chief architect of Revolution 9 teaches at Southern. So it would be one of his, not so much employees, but fellow professors. So do you reject Resolution 9? And see, here's the problem. In the Southern Baptist Convention, you have the 11th commandment. The 11th commandment says, thou shalt not speak evil of a fellow Southern Baptist in public. Therefore, if a fellow Southern Baptist is behind Resolution 9, all of a sudden, Commandment 11 becomes, I can't say anything about Resolution 9, even though Resolution 9 says that CRT is what I just said CRT isn't in a different statement. And that leads to an uncertain sound of the trumpet, shall we say, to use a biblical analogy. Number 8, do you reject your previous statements in favor of CRT? Because what we just listened to is soaked in CRT. I mean, I've tried to listen to it and go, okay, how could someone try to hold these two things together? And I don't think it could be done, but I can sort of see some of the directions someone might try to go. Number 9, can you define whiteness or white supremacy? Because it's just being used constantly. I mean, a few years ago, who even said it? But now we're being told the only reason nobody was saying it is because everybody was it. And those of us out here in the real world are going, we weren't even thinking about it. And they're going, that's the whole point. No, it's not. Can you define whiteness or white supremacy for that matter? And number 10, do you believe critical race theory can be used if subordinate to the gospel. I suppose that would be related to number 7. Do you reject Resolution 9? Because that's basically what Resolution 9 was trying to say. These are absolutely perfectly proper questions. They really are questions that I think need to be answered, because I can't hold it. I'm appreciative for the vast majority of what was found in that statement. Agree, have said the same things. What's missing to me are, for example, is the necessary emphasis that if racism is a sin, and it says it is, it's a sin of prejudice. It's a sin of, hold on a second here. I know I'm going over just a second, but where did I go? There it is. Toward the beginning, it specifically identified sin. Yeah. At its core, racism is about the sin of partiality. It imposes a double standard on one group of human beings on the basis of perceived physical characteristics. The Bible is clear that God shows no partiality and expects his people to reflect his character. Like all sin, this can take a variety of forms and deeply shape an entire culture or society. Like all sin, it is often deceptive. Okay, so can we identify Talbert Swan's anti-white racism as black racism? Is it a sin? If we cannot identify, if we are so captive to the society that we're going to buy the society's teaching that only one group is guilty of this sin and no one else can be. Talbert Swan says, I can't be a black racist. I can't. James Cone says you can't be a black racist. Okay? If we've capitulated there, the battle's done. It's over. The war's over. Just put a chain on the door and go home. Because there's no way to have a biblical discussion when you're telling somebody that because of the nation you live in and its history, certain people can't commit sin. That undercuts the entirety of the gospel, folks. That's it. It's gone. It's done. So I would love. See, I'm not one of those folks that wants to see Dr. Hall hung from the gallows. I'm not one of those people. I'd love to talk to him. I'd love to be able to ask him these questions. But I think these are valid questions. And my concern, my deep, deep, deep concern, the Southern Baptist Convention is in trouble. And the one thing that will keep the convention from being able to right itself and to survive the cultural onslaught, maybe is much smaller, but much healthier, is if the 11th commandment remains in place. The 11th commandment does not save the Southern Baptist Convention. The 11th commandment has become the mechanism whereby those seeking to destroy it are able to do so without criticism. That's, I think, vitally important. I really think it's vitally important. So